Greetings and salutations. This is Abdelhadi with the Bitter Truth, where we may not have all the answers, but we're going to ask an awful lot of questions. Today, my guest is Dr. John Haas. He is a professor of history at Cerritos College and the founder and director of the Global Consortium for Sustainable Peace, a network of global partners that share a common goal of bridging cultural gaps in our world and promoting peace. The Global Consortium broadcasts live to over 2.1 million college students throughout California, webcasts on the internet, broadcasts on local television station 3C Media Solutions, and interactively shown live to partner schools, educators, students, and institutions across the globe. His guests in the past have included, this is a massive who's who, but I'm going to nail it down to a couple of people: Noam Chomsky, Paul Arthur, Norman Finklestein, Tariq Ramadan. I mean, people that if you don't know who they are, you should know who they are. And if you don't know who Noam Chomsky is, you've been living under a rock for the past 70 years. But very, very, very impressive list of folks. He's also been recognized by Congress for his work in global peace and has addressed the United Nations. Yes, that United Nations, not the one down the street from you that's next to the 7-Eleven. Dr. John Haas, are you there?
I am.
Awesome. Hey, I really appreciate you coming on the show. I know we've known each other for a while and everything, but it's always an honor to have somebody of your caliber come on and grace us with some of your knowledge and not to, over-edify, but you know more than me, so that's why you're here.
No, Abe, it's been a real pleasure to be on the show. I admire your show, and I was waiting to be asked, and so I'm really thrilled that somebody asked me to be on the show. So.
Is that what's wrong with my dating life? I just don't ask? Is that it?
Yeah,
they're just waiting,
you, and you were received.
Ah, there you go. Okay, well, hey, man, listen. So let's jump in a little bit. Why don't you start off by talking about the Global Consortium and how that got started? Because I remember when we were working together back in the '90s, just trying to get through things. '80s, Jesus, I'm old. So you were at Claremont Graduate School, you were getting your PhD, and you were doing student teaching, and you had a couple sections at some of the schools locally, but then you got into Cerritos College. And then it kind of went from there. How did that go down?
Yeah. Well, one of the things I was asked to do was teach world civilization because they need it for aspiring teachers. We have a program called the Teacher Track Program, and in California there was a dire need for teachers, and so they really wanted to expedite these students and get them out teaching. But they needed someone to teach world civilization, and I was the only person in the department that had any background in teaching world civilization. So it sounds a bit cliche, but I wanted to bring the world to my students and my students to the world. And this is just like when we were in high school, when you'd get a nice guest speaker to come in, and obviously it was different than the teacher. It was some diversion. So I started off very humbly. I just wanted someone in world civilization, which is incredibly diverse. I teach 5,000 years in 18 weeks. So, you're talking about Mesopotamia all the way to the Aztecs. So I just realized that I had to get people to kind of help me out a little bit with their particular specialties. And then, I don't know if I'd call it graduation, when I graduated, where I just thought, well, I'll ask somebody else. And I was totally surprised. I asked Noam Chomsky way back if he would video conference with my students. And I mean, for a lot of my students, that was such a thrill and shocking. And then after that, I had the great joy of taking my oldest daughter, Emma, to MIT to interview Chomsky in his office.
Wow.
And let my daughter ask some questions, linguistic questions, because a lot of people forget that Chomsky began, his fame comes from linguistics, his focus on language and not just being, anti-American sentiment or something like that. But once you get Chomsky, it's very easy to kind of leverage other people. And I would like to say that Chomsky has never asked me for a penny, no honorarium. I did write him a check when I was at MIT, and I don't believe he ever cashed it. So, when people try to say, it's going to be $2,000 if you interview me, I just kind of remind them Chomsky did it for nothing. And, I think I just kind of, I built it up a little bit. And it really, exceeded my expectations. I didn't know that this would happen, but, I got a real joy in asking people. And you mentioned a couple people. A couple semesters ago, I had the Black Panthers, not the movie, the Black Panthers, and I was able to get neo-Marxist Richard Wolff, and that was a real undertaking. So, to come to the school and do a show, and I was back and forth with negotiations. I said, I know you're worth all the money in the world, but at a community college, we can't do that. And I finally, got him. And so I feel certain pride that I have that ability to bring some of the greatest speakers to my campus for the benefit of my students. And that's what I think it's all about. And just like the guest on your show, because you have a guest on your show doesn't mean that they necessarily represent your views. You want to challenge your students, these people that don't know about the Israeli, occupation, or they don't, have not heard of some of these guest speakers. I find it very interesting that most of my guest speakers have been Jewish that speak about the Israeli, conflict, the occupation. In fact, this coming spring break, I'm going to London for an interview with a guy who's fantastic. His name is Neve Gordon, and he's an Israeli Jew that is very outspoken about the Israeli occupation. So it's just those kinds of people around the world that you want to bring together. And just another highlight, I thought. But a couple semesters ago, I connected with Al-Quds University in Ramallah, and my students came 90 minutes before their first class. Their first class with me was at 9:30, but we met up at 8 o'clock so that we could dialogue live with Palestinians so that they could understand what their lives were like. And so many of my students, I mean, the vast majority, knew nothing of really what was going on in Palestine. And these, I want to stress that these are live discussions. And I was invited by the Palestinians to come stay with them, which I did, and I filmed extensively in the West Bank. But those are just some of the examples that I would say at a community college that I want these fantastic guest speakers to be in the lives of my students. And as you saw in the kind of bio, the diversity of topics are really out there. Like I said, it could be Richard Wolff and, neo-Marxist economics, or it can be Chomsky or the Black Panthers or Burma political prisoners. So every semester I try to get at least 4 or 5, major shows for the benefit of the students. And that's really how it's progressed over the years, really. How
do you guys sustain yourselves? I mean, do you accept donations? Is, like, for example, if I went to your website, I don't think I looked, but is there a link for if somebody wanted to donate or become a subscriber?
Well, I actually feel ashamed. I'm not a very good business person. I've got a couple little tiny grants at school from the associated student body that have helped me. I kind of have a reputation on the campus for bringing good shows. But I'm just starting to branch out a little bit, and
okay.
I am a little thin-skinned. I have a lot of videos on Vimeo, but I just started to put them up on YouTube, knowing full well, as you do, the kind of abuse you're going to get and criticism, and believe it or not, I'm a little bit thin-skinned, so I'm just launching out in that kind of direction, and trying to, I do. You know exactly. If you post anything on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, you're going to sink. It doesn't matter how balanced you try to be. What you do, it's just and I have to kind of brace myself for that. So just letting people know.
I'll give you a little bit of a tip, and trust me, this is the blind leading the naked, because you've put yourself out there with some of these interviews, trust me. But what I learned a while ago is to just have fun with it. And I've had a couple of guests on that have admitted to what you said. Hey, I'm I'm a little sensitive. It's like, well, screw it, man. I mean, have fun with it. If they're going to be pissed off anyway, then really piss them off. And when folks do that whole let's agree to disagree, fuck that. You're wrong. And this is why. This is 2 + 2. It's 4. It's like this joke I heard about 6-8 months ago. This guy, Jimmy Dore, came to town in Austin, and he had this great joke about climate science deniers versus climate science creationists versus evolutionists versus a scientist, and how the mainstream media, because they don't want to piss off anybody, they get them both on the news, and the guy in the middle, like a Brian Williams type who lies for a living, will sit there and say, "Oh, wait, well, here's the creation guy, here's the science guy. I guess we'll never know." And the joke goes, "Well, yeah, we do. Who won the Super Bowl? Patriots won the Super Bowl. You don't get the managers or the coaches of both teams and debate it and go, I guess we'll never know. The score's 13-3. It almost went into overtime at a 3. It's like, that's it. There's no really, if people want to be pissed about it. And so it's like, and there's a great series that Al Jazeera put out a few months back. I don't know if you saw that documentary on the lobby. It's on AIPAC. And they just hired this really suave kid from, I think, Oxford or Cambridge, Jewish kid, and, cosmopolitan, good-looking kid. And, he snuck in with a button cam, and he got these really damning interviews, and a lot of them. And they just, a 4-part series. I think you would dig it. But I say all that to say this.
You opened up a segue for me. I got to tell you,
go ahead.
My cinematographer, I ask him what kind of work he has, and in his business it's feast or famine. But anyway, he says, I got a job with AIPAC and, filming. He says, what's AIPAC? And I fell out of my chair laughing. I said, you don't know what AIPAC is? And he said, no. So I explained what AIPAC was all about. And then he got another gig with him. And I said, do you get any film footage? Because, usually the camera guy, he's got his card in there and he has it. He said, it's weird. I kind of use their equipment and it gets broadcast out. Right. So he doesn't have a copy. But the next time he went for AIPAC, he taped the whole thing and he sent it to me.
Wow.
And I interviewed Richard Falk in Santa Barbara. He used to be the guy to bring peace between Israel and Palestine and all that. And in the conversation is we have to neutralize Richard Falk. And there's like a handful of people that I had interviewed. We need to neutralize them. I mean, I'm listening to this from inside AIPAC, and then the fact that we must go to war with Iran. One of the reasons I asked to go visit Neve Gordon, who I've been trying to interview for a long period of time, is to ask him those very questions. So you criticize AIPAC, and now you're an anti-Semite. You criticize the occupation, you're an anti-Semite, and so it's very cool to have somebody who is an Israeli Jew, lives in Israel, just got a job teaching in London, just to get their point of view. It's not. It's not Israeli versus Palestinian. We can almost guess what the outcome is. I always find that very powerful when the people that I interview are Israeli Jews and the story that they give you. I find it very, very powerful.
We've had Biko Peled on this show a few times. He's I
listened to the show. Yeah, that was a great show.
We've had him on a few. I've been lucky to have him on a few times, and just a lot of knowledge. And people, when I aired the first one. I got a lot of Israeli friends in LA, and I got a lot of American Jewish friends. And, they're mixed bag. But I had a lot of my more conservative friends kind of get angry about it. They go, well, he's not telling the whole truth. And I'm like, well, what part is he not telling? Because I've been back there. I was back there 30 years ago when it was much more chill. So what? And I went through crap as an American citizen. It didn't matter because my name's not American, right? And I got hassled like my fucking cousins. Not that I have a dog in this fight, but I don't have a right to return if I wanted to. I can't stay longer than 90 days on a visa. I filmed in the West Bank, and one of the things that I did was I was really afraid my card was going to be taken out. When I went back through Israel, and so I uploaded that. I had backups. As it happened, nobody gave me any trouble, but I filmed extensively in the West Bank. Sure.
People said don't film the IDF there, so I filmed them. Don't do this, so I just filmed anything that I wanted to, but I was very afraid that my card would be taken out.
100%.
And that I didn't mind losing my camera. I did mind losing the card.
That's right. Now you can always get another camera, but that film is that film. Hey, but listen, a little shifting gears. I mean, I wanted to use this to kind of get into. I know you wanted to talk about this a lot more too, but we just had Cheeto Jesus yesterday, otherwise known as the President of the United States, announced that he was going to declare a national emergency, which I thought an emergency was immediate. It's funny that he waited 6 months for this, but I guess it's still an emergency, especially if you make one up in your head. But he has a reputation to upload. Thank you, Tara.
Right. Well, one of the things, Abe, that was very interesting that is going to be used by the Democratic Party, what he said yesterday, I didn't really need to do this.
Right.
But I wanted to expedite it, get it going, and the Democrats jumped all over that. If you didn't really need to do this, it can't constitute an emergency, and he's violating the Constitution and the power of the purse, and there's already people in Texas that already lawsuits that happened yesterday because their property is going to be taken away if Trump gets his way. So it starts out very quickly.
Well, real quick, because I want to talk about what your experience down here has been. But and I'm sure you're familiar with this representative, a guy named Will Hurd in Texas, who ran in a very, very red district, whose district runs the biggest expansive border country in the United States. Ran for election, by the way, as a congressman, against the wall in a red district and won. Ran for re-election vociferously against the wall and won. 80% red district. None of them want the fucking wall. They don't want to lose their property. They don't want to lose their farms. They don't want to lose land that's been in their family for how many years, companies, whatever they got, and they don't want to do it. And because they know there's no necessity. I just drove through town on a road trip, and I went through El Paso. I didn't see. I was there for a couple of days. I didn't see what you saw. But when you were down there, what did you see? Because the statistics are staggering. But I mean, I want to have a little boots on the ground experience. I mean, you were there, and I don't care that you're not morally safer or whoever. This isn't Vietnam, but I want to know what you saw.
Well, if you don't mind, I'd kind of like to start with Big Bend National Park in Texas, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
And there's a reason, there's a logic here, but I'm always watching documentaries as a history professor, and I came across this Big Bend National Park, and what the hell is this? I don't know anything about it in Texas. And there's a wonderful PBS little documentary. It's only about 30 minutes, and I was totally blown away by Big Bend National Park. I mean, mostly from a botanical, way. It's one of the most magnificent places because you have the Chihuahuan Desert, you have the Chisos Mountains, and you have the Rio Grande all in one place. I'm sitting there watching this and just being totally amazed by the diversity. And all of a sudden, I start reading all these articles that Republicans and Democrats come together in a bipartisan way that they don't want Trump's wall in their Big Bend National Park. So immediately, with all the hatred and toxic, politics that we got going, I said, Jesus, if there's some kind of consensus taken here, I want to go out and find out about this consensus. So I landed in El Paso. It was about a 6.5-hour drive. I ended up in Terlingua, the ghost town, which is kind of like the gateway into the Big Bend National Park. And then I got to Big Bend. Well, I got to Terlingua late at night, and I got into this honky-tonk little bar, and people there were very, very friendly in Terlingua, this ghost town. And there was just this consensus, like, don't fuck with our park. And when you go to Big Bend National Park, you are just totally blown away by the beauty. And it borders, Mexico. But just this consensus that people would come out there and say, hey, listen, this is absolutely ridiculous. They don't want a wall. There's signs everywhere. And one of the first things I did when I got to Terlingua, that there's a pilot by the name of Marcos Paredes, and he really brings this incredible diversity because he worked for Customs and Border Patrol many years ago. And then he became a park ranger. But when you're a park ranger, you can't get political or you're going to lose your job.
Right.
And then what happened, he left there, and then he has these flights that he'll take you. So I brought my cinematographer with me. We put a GoPro under the wing, and then my cinematographer filmed from the back. We went up over the Chisos Mountains, and you got peaks that are 8,000 feet. And you realize how ridiculous it would be to try to, put any kind of wall. Nature's already put a wall there. And then as you start to go down the Rio Grande, there's a clip of me where I'm right in the middle of the Rio Grande with one hand on the left, grabbing the United States of America, and the other hand grabbing Mexico as the water comes through me. And you go through some of these canyons like Santa Elena Canyon. Literally, Abe, you can almost touch with your hands the United States cliffs and the Mexican cliffs at the same time. So this kind of idea, it's like as you get there, that people are just unified, and also how ludicrous it would be to try to, set up any kind of wall there. What a waste of time it would be. And, one of the things I've done on my travels is actually to talk to sheriffs and people on the borders in law enforcement and mayors to get their opinions about what's going on. And all of them are basically saying that this is a manufactured crisis by Donald Trump.
Right.
There's no need. And I think what I felt happy about was, filming all of the material so I can show people what the Chisos Mountains look like. One of the things that people don't think, if you put up a wall in Big Bend, then all the waters that would naturally flow into the Rio Grande won't. So you'll have swamps. All the animals will get cut. I mean, it will just be ecological, total disaster. And so that's what I did in Big Bend. And then I crossed into a little place called Boquillas. And Boquillas is it's totally amazing. You walk right into Mexico. It's one dirt street. So there's a couple of bars, couple of restaurants, some mules. I mean, a dilapidated church. It's a small little place. When you return back to the United States through Boquillas, there's not even a border patrol guy there. I mean, there's no border patrol guy. What you do is you take your passport and you put it in the machine, and then all of a sudden the phone rings from El Paso, and there's a border patrol guy in El Paso, and he asks you two questions. Are you a U.S. citizen? Yes. And why did you go to Boquillas? For some Mexican culture and tacos? And then you walk right the hell out of there. No border patrol.
Right.
And this place got really, Boquillas, Mexico, got really hit after 9/11. I mean, when you go through there, Abe, you realize there's no threat there or anything like that. But a lot of the people right after 9/11, they had to leave to the United States or find out. I mean, they couldn't sustain themselves. And then I believe it was 2011. They opened up the border again, and trade is going well. It's a fantastic place to go. But it also, I think, illustrates the cross-cultural coordination. You're not going to hear that too much in news stories.
No.
If there's violence or there's conflict or there's chaos, that's always on the news. But it's amazing how much collaboration actually takes place in looking after the Rio Grande, looking after the floodplains, just working on both sides. And that's really what I took from there.
I got friends that live here. I got friends. I'm sorry I interrupted you. Were you done?
No, yeah, I was done.
Well, real quick, I mean, I got friends that live here in Austin, and they grew up in the Valley. They grew up in El Paso. They grew up in RGV or El Paso or down McAllen and Laredo. And I've been to Laredo a few times. I got my day job. I got a client down in Laredo. I was there 3 times last year, and one of my clients sits right at the border, right where the traffic goes into Mexico, and you're looking at this guy's office, and there's the Rio Grande, and that's like the Mississippi River. That's a wide ass river, and it moves pretty quick, and people go, well, yeah, they're moving drugs. I mean, have you ever walked a mile with a 30-pound pack? I wasn't in the military, but, living out here just to go hiking, just to go to a river to go swimming for the day with my friends, you park your car, you walk in 3/4 of a mile, you got a big-ass igloo and some lawn chairs. That's pretty – that's enough.
Yeah.
And that's about, like 10 kilos of cocaine if I was hauling. And I'm doing that for miles and miles and miles with no sleep and no food and no water. And then I got to get in a river and try to swim against the current and make it across. These people aren't even thinking, and they ignore the statistics. But when I talk to my friends that live down there, they're like, dude, we used to be able to walk in and out. We used to be able to walk across the bridge, go into Mexico, get our teeth done, walk back, get some food down there, spend the day, walk back. They'd walk over, they'd walk back. It wasn't this crazy thing, and the statistics are ridiculous that he's not playing to his base, he's playing them. The people that still believe Donald Trump are being played. He's not kowtowing to them, he's tricking them. He's lying to them.
Well, the thing is, Abe, it does remind me of some fascist leaders in the 1930s. But when I talk about these things, they're not interested in facts because that doesn't really work. You have to hype people up. So you talk about the bad hombres, and you talk about the drug dealers, and you talk about the rapists, and you talk about that. So they don't want to know that apprehensions on the border are way down.
20-year low.
20-year low, and people coming across the border, are way down. And I mean, all the facts are not important. I mean, the fascists understood that. You don't have to give out, just paint it really, really big. And once you start demonizing people, it just makes it easy to come up with these particular, policies. I just looking at a film or just a video that I put together, and there was this gentleman, as I was looking at immigration films, and his name is Sheriff Tony Estrada. And this guy was in all these documentaries, and there's something about him. It just this humane way of policing the border. He's in Nogales, Arizona, but he was raised in Nogales, Mexico. And anyway, I watched all these videos, and I do this all the time. I wrote down his name. I emailed him, and I said, I'd really love to come and interview you. And, we're back and forth. And I just interviewed him, a couple months back. And, some of the things that he said just totally blew me away. Like, we have 5% of the world's population here in the United States of America, and we do 50% of the world's drugs. So, I was listening to Trump yesterday, all these, fentanyl and all these drugs are coming over. There's never a focus on the United States as, these big druggies.
Purdue.
Yeah.
Fucking, we have a Sackler family. We have not prosecuted a single one of these motherfuckers. That's what makes me so angry when you talk about these facts. I mean, and one of the facts that these people like to ignore, his supporters, is his 2017 Department of Homeland Security report in 2017 came out last summer saying that illegal crossings are down 90% from 2 million in 2000 to 190,000 in 2017. And you're sitting there going, wait, that's the Trump administration putting that report. So why aren't you acknowledging what your guys' administration put out? If it wasn't the truth, or if they were going to, they would doctor it, wouldn't they? Wouldn't they doctor it in their favor? It's like when the Koch brothers paid for that Medicare study. Turns out it saves $3 trillion over 10 years. They keep saying it's going to cost $32 trillion. Yeah, but versus $35 trillion, it's still a better deal. But no,
absolutely.
You know what I mean? They bend the facts to their will, and they go, but this is in his report. This is his DHS under Christian. What's her face? Now I'm spacing on her name. Tired. Not Gillibrand. That's a senator, but the one that got chased out of the Mexican restaurant. You know exactly what I'm talking about. But that's her report, and you're sitting there going, wait, you're kidding me. 90%, and we're still manufacturing a problem, and you guys are still believing it? And you get...
Well, it's interesting, Abe. It's just it's always who's in control of the narrative. So, when you look at that, it's always a one-way street. It's like all the drugs are coming from Mexico. Well, the drugs can only come from Mexico if someone's doing them on this side.
That's right.
And if you look at the statistic that I just gave you, the Sheriff Tony Estrada, just the coolest guy, 5% of the world's population doing 50% of the world's drugs.
It's amazing.
And then, of course, the other thing we know, they're coming across the port of entry. I mean, they just had the trial of El Chapo, in the last week, and it's the same thing. Oh, well, the drugs are coming right across where Customs and Border Patrol are.
Yeah. They find a way that's not traditional. I mean, the Frank Lucas story. Did you ever see the movie American Gangster?
No.
Oh my God. Okay, I got obsessed with this film, and I Wikipedia'd everything because it was based on a true story. And so when it's based on a true story, you want to see what was true. And so it was a Ridley Scott film with Denzel Washington, Russell Crowe, about 12.
Yeah, I know that I've seen some clips. I never saw the whole thing.
Fucking amazing story. Without giving the whole show away. He was a middleman. He wanted to cut the middleman out, so he wanted to get his heroin. So where did he go? He had a cousin working in Vietnam in the Army as a sergeant. They went up. He flew out there, went upriver, met the main supplier, said, look, I'm going to pay you directly, put money in your account every month. This is what I want. And the guy cut pure, untouched heroin, no fillers, no nothing. So that Frank Lucas was selling it cheaper, better brand, cheaper than anybody else. And he did it for years. And how did he get it from Vietnam to the United States? He smuggled them in the panels of coffins of dead soldiers. Kilos and kilos and kilos and kilos and kilos of this stuff. And you're going to sit there and say, yeah, we got to watch the TSA because they're taking them in suitcases. Yeah, this guy figured it out. No, you don't. And he did it for the pretty much the entire Vietnam War from 68 to about 74, 75 when they finally pulled out of Saigon. He did it to the very last day. And it was amazing. It was an amazing story. And when I Googled it and looked it up, it was an incredible story between the two guys, the cop and the real criminal. They had this cat and mouse thing going on in real life. It wasn't manufactured. It was a years-long cat and mouse game. Just crazy, crazy stuff. And there's so much about the movie that I'm not even giving away, but it was just really, really good. But just to make that point, that people just go on this CSI Red Dawn fantasy John Wayne shit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's funny going across. One of the things I try to do is hit different places, on the border, just to kind of check it out. Whether it be Tijuana or Juarez or Nogales, and it's just it's very interesting. As I said, you start talking to people. This sheriff Tony Estrada has been working in law enforcement for 50 years. I mean, he knows what's going on there. And the thing that really hit me is just his very humane way of treating people that come across the border. One of the things that he said that I didn't really think about, Abe, you always hear this, my wife is British. I've been married for 30 years, and we went through the legal procedures. I had to get an English barrister, pay for it, all that stuff. But the sheriff was telling me so many of these people have no papers at all, no paper trail at all. So it's not like they just come to the border and they can, get in line and say, okay, I'd like to apply legally. It's not going to happen. And just to give you another little illustration, I was in Tijuana, and somebody gave me a tip-off that all the people looking for asylum were like where the taxi cabs all are. And so I started to talk to these people. And, these people are all set up for asylum. And I talked to two Nicaraguans. They wouldn't let me video, but I have the tape, so they didn't want to be on camera. So I started to interview them. I mean, truly a case for asylum. Death back in Nicaragua, they're either going to kill you or you're going to be forced into the middle. I mean, a legitimate reason for applying for asylum. So what these people do is they get in line, they fill out the paperwork, and so they think that the process is going forward. And then the next day they're going to come and get fingerprinted. I went to this little place. It's called the Casa del Migrante. There's a Catholic priest there that feeds and houses these people in Tijuana. And he told me that he has firsthand knowledge that none of these people are going to be processed. They're just getting them fingerprinted in case there's any trouble down the line, and they give them a piece of paper. And then what they do is they send them on their way. Or, you're waiting. I went when they had the migrants. Remember the migrants coming into Tijuana? And I actually went. I called my videographer. I said, listen, we got to go to, San Diego, Tijuana straight away. And I visited them and, did all this kind of stuff. And they're waiting for months and months and months on their cell phone to get a little ding, to say, well, you're next in line. It ain't happening. And that's when you don't have. I mean, it's so sad to watch them because they have this hope. And they, if you're from Mexico and you say, "Oh, I just like to work in the United States," that's not legitimate as far as they're concerned. I mean, work is one thing. You have to be a threat to your life. If I go back to Nicaragua, they'll kill me, or my sister will be killed, or there'll be violence, or Honduras, El Salvador.
Countries that we have fucked with and messed up.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's one thing I've said in some of my interviews. The vast majority of people don't know what we did in Guatemala and Honduras and El Salvador and Nicaragua, and one of the things also that the Sheriff Estrada pointed out there, we created in the United States the drug cartels.
Yep.
We created them.
That's right.
And then people always pointing the finger. It's never pointing the finger at us. How do we create that? And then, all the money that we're spending or Trump's trying to spend for the wall, I mean, why don't we look at the root problem economically, socially, politically in some of these countries if that's really what our concern is? The wall's not going to stop. In Nogales, where I was, they believe that they had the first tunnel that was there. There's over 200 tunnels in Nogales.
Wow.
Over 200 tunnels all over Nogales. That's the places, when they secured the border, then people started just digging their tunnels. So, the wall's not going to stop.
The only time I think in history, and you're the history guy, so you tell me, I think the only time in history, and there might be three, but the only time in the history I think we've ever taken responsibility and blamed ourselves was Prohibition. I think it was the only time that we said, wow, shit, crime's up, mob is powerful. They got a lot of money. Wow.
Yeah.
They created a black market out of booze. Beer used to be a nickel a glass. Now it's 50 cents a glass in a fucking speakeasy. Jesus Christ. We better knock this thing off. 12 years later, bang, it's gone. Right? It's estimated that the mafia made $1 trillion in today's dollars from prohibition, which as you know, accelerated their power well into the late 70s, early 80s when they started to fade. And they still got some muscle, but not like they had before. They were buying senators, that kind of thing.
I teach global studies class, and the first thing I said in class, if you're raw about the United States and you can't critique the United States, I said you should really get out of this class. And I said I take no joy in this, but I got heavily influenced by Chomsky among others.
Sure.
But how we believe in democracy, and we set up democracies all over the world, and what we do is we set up dictatorships, and the CIA in Iran, and the CIA in Guatemala, and all. I mean, so after I tell the students, I have the ones that are in the class that can view these things and be critical about what's going on in the rest of the world. I mean, it's so funny. I always say, we condemn Iran. Say, how many wars has Iran had in the last 20 years? Mm-hmm. And then ask how many wars Israel and the United States have had in the last 20 years, mm-hmm. or the United States has weapons of mass destruction, and mm-hmm. and what would happen if a country invaded us? I said, what the hell are you invading us for? Well, you have weapons of mass destruction. That's the reason it's okay to go to Iraq because of weapons of mass destruction, but no, not here.
Not Israel. No.
Yeah.
Or Pakistan. No.
No, it's all kind of crazy.
Well,
but I think it all gets back to the narrative. Who controls the narrative?
See, but that was my next question, because I was going to ask you, when students are confronted with this, because the filter that I use all the time when people, challenge me on this stuff or whatever, and like now I got a lot of my friends, even people on the so-called left, here in Austin, which is the bluest city in the reddest state, the biggest contrast is, a lot of them great guys, great ladies, but most of them are corporate Democrat people who they think, Hillary should have been president, blah, blah, blah. When they say to you what they got off of television on the Venezuela thing, and I go, well, gee, by that metric, why aren't we invading Colombia? They kill campesinos by the thousands. They rig elections. They jail and kill journalists. But why are they cool, and why aren't we rescuing them? Oh, that's right, because they give us all their commodities for basically free, and we get to enslave their people for 15 cents a day and no bathroom breaks and no pension. Is that about right? Meanwhile, we pay their president $500,000 a Cadillac and a bucket of chicken, and that's kind of what we do. And we've been doing that in Central and South America for years.
Well, it's like listening to John Bolton the other day. He's rubbing his hands together, seeing all the opportunities for oil in Venezuela. Right. That, the demise of Venezuela is our opportunity. We just don't learn.
We don't.
Keep doing the same things over and over, intervene in someone else's elections, and we bring on half this stuff ourselves, and it just don't get out of the situation. And even things, like sanctions. The sanctions always hurt the people, mm-hmm. At the grassroots, mm-hmm. not really hurting the people at the very top. And we did that in Iran, and it hurt the poor people in Iran,
Iraq.
The common people. Mm-hmm. It's going to do the same thing in Venezuela.
But isn't that the strategy, though?
Yeah.
To squeeze from the bottom, hoping that the people will aid in your revolt to upend the apple cart. Isn't that? And they don't realize that they realize the blowback. I mean, that's a CIA term, but the American people have a short memory, but corporations, they never forget.
Well, growing up, and I told my students that I never would have critiqued the United States as a young person because I believed in all that, angelic stuff.
Yeah.
And, we go and we set up democracies and we believe in free elections and we believe in capitalism, which is about creativity and being who you want and all that stuff. And I was never really taught all that stuff. And as I just mentioned, I don't get any joy. It's like listening to Chomsky talk about all this stuff. You wish it was a different world. You wish you could say, yes, what America is instrumental in doing is bringing democracy to the world and supervising free elections and, helping communities out and, all that stuff. But it's like putting a mirror up to the face of the United States. Everything we condemn about other countries, we do ourselves.
100%.
100, and people don't like for you to point that out to them. It's like your show is called The Bitter Truth, right?
Yeah,
So,
well.
You're going to show people things. They go, oh, no, I don't want to hear that. And the most provocative is I said, one of the questions I've been working at, for a show is what constitutes truth in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict? I mean, what kind of evidence can you bring to bear if you're a searcher of truth and you want people to understand what it's like living under occupation, or what the West Bank is, or what Gaza? It's like if you point things out, there's all kinds of violations of international law in Israel.
Mm-hmm.
Well, why would that just piss people off if you're intellectual enough, if you can look at some of the evidence, but people don't want to look at the evidence,
Well, it's lazy. It's lazy. I mean, it's easy because it's easy. It's lazy. It's like you don't have to challenge your identity. I mean, this stuff's you hit it on the head a few minutes back. This doesn't bring you any joy. Unfortunately for me, I'm kind of a sadist, so it brings me a little joy. But the reality of it, though, is that if we don't know the truth, how do we solve the world's problems? I mean, how do we fix our problems? For Bush to, with a straight face, after 9/11, which was horrific, to say, they hate us for our freedoms. Well, God damn it, you need a better explanation of that than that. And I remember when religious books for about a month were the best sellers at Barnes & Noble and Borders, they couldn't keep them. Everyone wanted to suddenly read up on Islam and spirituality, and what's a deity? Why does a man believe in God one way? There's 4,000 religions. What are they? Da 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 da. And that lasted about a month, and then it was back to Justin and Brittany, right? And the same crap that we do now. And Chris Hedges wrote a book last year called America: The Farewell Tour, and it's a dark fucking book. If you want, if what you do brings you no joy, this book is not the joy read. I read it twice just to kind of remember stuff, but it's not happy. But he makes that point that we've reduced the press in this country to just like the courtiers of the royal court. They sit about and they kind of play with their ties and scarves and gossip about who the king is banging. There's no real news. There's no hey, the Romans are spending too much money on the military. This Constantine, the first guy, he's got to fucking go. He's losing his mind. He's going to legalize Christianity. What the fuck is that? None of that.
But Abe, it's like almost as around the world, there are a lot of people that really dig on American ideals.
100%.
You could say, well, it's our around the world, people really believe in our ideals. Yes. It can be like the Bill of Rights and separation of powers and checks and balances in the Constitution. It's the disparity between what we say and what we actually do.
Sure.
So this idea of having a constitution, I mean, the world in many ways admires that, or having a Bill of Rights, or having open and free elections. It's not there's a problem with that. It's what actually happened. Mm-hmm. We don't really believe we could look at Ho Chi Minh and saying, oh, well, we're going to have an election in Geneva, free open election, until someone says, shit, we all know Ho Chi Minh's going to win. Mm-hmm. And we can't have that because he's a communist, so no free election. Or you might look at, Israel having an open and free election, except the problem was Hamas won.
Right.
And an open and free election, and then say, oh, shit, we can't have that.
Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt,
what I mean by open and free election is if our guy gets in, then it's open and free.
Right.
And if you start pointing out the hypocrisies of American, a lot of people don't want to hear about it.
Well, it's like little kids see through that shit. Right? Remember when you were a little kid and you played games, and then some dude changed the rules in the middle? Remember that? Like you're playing kickball, and we had it established. No, that's the out or whatever. And then some guy, and then he's arguing with you. No, we didn't say that. Yeah, we did. Everybody's. It's like Animal Farm. As basic as this is, it's not a long book. I tell everybody to read this. I mean, it's not a long book. It's like 180 pages. That fairy tale, that allegory, is exactly what we've become, a corporate coup d'etat in slow motion, as Chris Hedges says, where the Constitution, Bill of Rights, and all that was great, started off great, even though we began in racism and genocide and murder. But hey, let's not split hairs. As far as, with allowing the document to be amended, kind of a small miracle, kept adding amendments. Hey, women could vote. Hey, no more slaves. That kind of changed as it went, as opposed to, nope, this is the law and that's what it is, and we got a king. So that was cool. But then we became a corporate coup d'etat in slow motion where everything started collapsing and all the small democratic institutions became co-opted. And now we have what we have, where the ideals are awesome. It's like America's like a movie. It's not real anymore. Domestically, yeah, we're pretty cool. Someone asked me the other day, well, do you think we're a fascist state? I go, yeah, but they're good at it. They're not Hitler. Okay, they're not the Stasi in East Germany, but they're watching you. But they're keeping you glued to your screen, and now you got a mortgage, and you got things to worry about, and you got a car to lose. So you might not be out protesting in the streets like they did back in the day. So but they monitor you. And that's where the ideals are complete, like you said, disparate from the reality. But we keep pimping this.
Well, go ahead.
I'm sorry.
It's interesting with respect to Trump that many people in the Republican Party said, Trump, don't do it. Don't call this emergency. It's not an emergency. It's going to come haunt us in the election. Mm-hmm. The minute Trump did it, all these people in the Republican Party that critiqued him have now joined him.
Sure.
And that's the kind of question. I mean, they're supposed to be these great constitutionalists, right? The Republicans, they're holding on to the Constitution. Mm-hmm. Well, you can read in the Constitution about the power of the purse. Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden, the ideology changes. I mean, they told Trump not to do it, but he did it now. There's a bunch of Republicans joining him and supporting him. But you get back to the same thing. Are we going to use the Constitution as a document? Can we read the Constitution and say that, it has to go through Congress? Is this truly an emergency? All these different things in this ultra hyper partisan politics that's taken place. It's like all the ideals have gone out, out the door. They've gone out the window now. You don't really believe in that stuff.
No, well, I don't think anybody internationally really does. I mean, domestically, we think we do. And then, when I ask people, point to me one successful incursion we've enjoyed in 70 years since World War II. Everything we've touched has turned to shit. With the small exceptions of North and South Korea, after we leveled them and killed 2 million of their people, but hey, they bounced back, right? But in the last few minutes, I wanted to kind of get into a couple things back on the border really quick, and I appreciate you kind of going down this with me. That's why it's called a conversation. But in the 90s, Clinton's Interior famously said that the geography is our friend as far as illegal border crossings, and it was purposefully by design that people trying to cross the border were steered into the mountainous terrain, which you just said, because that was the geography that would kill them, or it would make it easier for us to catch them. What did you see as far as any strategy when you were down there? Like, was there any purposeful strategy to kind of keep people coming through that area, or not?
Yeah, well, as far as I was talking to this cool sheriff that I mentioned, Tony Estrada. And he was basically saying that, all the drugs and the things were coming through the border. And somebody kind of gave the analogy of it's like a balloon. Like what happens is the balloon at the border, it gets very tight there, but it pushes everybody out into the desert and into the mountains and all this horrible terrain where they end up, dying. I was just in Tucson not that long ago, maybe a month ago, with a group called the Tucson Samaritans, where we were just going out there and putting out food and water for these people coming across the desert. And I was yelling in Spanish, we have food, we have water, this is not, immigration. I am sure I just missed somebody by a few minutes because we found lots of material, sleeping bags, blankets. I actually brought home some slippers from the desert. Just talking to my wife about it. But yeah, it's like this is the thing too. People, the border is being secured. It's becoming tighter, and yet it's forcing all these other people out there to die out in the desert. And another thing, you have a tendency. One has, I think, a tendency to think of heat. I was in the Chihuahuan Desert. It's 115 to 120 degrees in the summer, but I went by many crosses in Arizona where people had frozen to death. I think one young girl, it was 19 degrees, and I went to, where she was buried out there. People die from being frozen to death.
Wow.
And this is what's actually happened. There have been a lot of skeletal remains that the Sheriff Estrada has found out there. So again, that just kind of speaks to it. And one thing too, and I said this at the beginning, but I don't pretend to be an authority on this. I'm on a mission, to find out, a lot more. But one of the things that the sheriff said to me that really stayed with me is to look at all these traits of people coming across that if you were living in the United States, you would think are wonderful. You're hardworking. You've got this incredible tenacity. You've got a dream. You're looking after your family. There was talking about like women. Almost all women know that if they're going to try to go with coyotes and come across this land, that they're going to be raped or sexually molested, and many women are taking pills so they don't become pregnant with something. What kind of personality, what kind of traits would you say that person has if they were in the United States? And one of the main messages of Sheriff Estrada, he says this again and again, I picked this up on all the videos and talked to him about it, was we spend far too much money and energy looking at people coming across the border and not enough money focused on the drugs that are coming over. He said the priorities are all screwed up. And you know this too, that the people that commit crimes from Mexico are much lower than the population in the United States of America. So that's a way of admitting, yes, every culture commits crimes.
Sure.
Every group of people commits crime, but way lower. That we spend an inordinate amount of time worrying about people coming, looking for work, and not trying to be in trouble, just taking care of business, usually very religious, hardworking, tenacious. And if you get sent back, you do it again. To me, I look at that like you never quit. And I have two daughters, and I ask myself, John, if you were living in a place that you could not sustain your family, you could not feed your family, would you go to another country? Would you try it? And my answer is absolutely yes. All right, my priorities would be above me, and I find that very interesting of those. The sheriff gave me a different view on somebody's qualities. The hardworking, the tenacious, the never quit attitude, the sacrificing of yourself to get to a place. And as I said earlier here about, if you have no paper trail, you're screwed.
100%.
If you have no papers, you're not going to sit at the border and say, I'd really like to come to your country legally, and I'd like to fill out the paperwork, and it ain't happening. No, it's not happening for people in Nicaragua.
No, this isn't the 60s anymore. My dad busted his ass to get here. And, kind of piggyback on what you just said, self-employed, never filled out a W-2 in his life. And I remember I was about 15 when the Iran thing happened. And, it's the first time I'd ever heard of Iran really going on. And then my old man gave me the whole story of Mossadegh. And I thought, he's crazy. That's not that's what the news says. And, turns out the fucking guy was right. And during that time, he was really pissed. And I asked him, I said, are you glad you came here? Or no, I said, why did you come here? And he goes, well, to make money. And I said, really, that's it? He goes, look, who would leave their family? Who would leave your mom, your dad, your brothers, your sisters, everything you know to be your life? Who would leave unless it wasn't good there? And he's from the West Bank. My dad's from a little village outside of Ramallah. And then he was like toward the end of 13 kids, unless he was going to run the sheep farm, which is what my grandfather did. He was pretty much going to work for one of my uncles, or he was going to maybe get a job with somebody else if he could. So my grandfather took pity on him and, bought him a boat trip to Brazil. Did 2 days in Italy and then went to Brazil. Lived there for 5 years, met my mom. But back then, it took 90 days to get green cards. All you needed was the money. As long as he was marrying a Brazilian national, he got into the country within 90 days. And so they came over, and that's how that happened. And and that's a whole hour conversation on him. But I do that little thumbnail snapshot because people don't understand that when I was a kid, I grew up in South Central LA in Southgate. Where Lindenwood, Compton, Downey, all the places are. And we were pretty mixed community when I was growing up there, just because, we had factory jobs and stuff. But there was always, an immigrant family that owned the donut shop, right? Whether they were Korean or wherever they were from. But you know what they would do? They would sleep two families to a donut shop. And then, when they saved up enough money, buy another donut shop. Then think about renting an apartment, and built a little dynasty. They got a gas station. We don't do that. And then we get mad at the immigrant coming over and taking advantage of what we have here. Well, they're busting their ass to do it. No one gave it to them.
Yeah. Absolutely. I think it's difficult to, kind of filter. I mean, it's like looking at arguments. Yeah, there's no doubt that there are people that came across from Mexico, but like as I said before, every country has bad people. Every country has good people. Mm-hmm. But I think demonizing the people that are coming over is not doing it. And you certainly know we don't really care about what's going on in Canada across the board.
Apparently not, because they outpace illegal immigration, by the way, 2-1. Yeah, but I guess they're the good kind of illegal immigration, right? And anyway, man. Well, hey, listen, John. I guess we got to get going here. The time is kind of winding down. But is there anything you want to leave the listeners with? A link to Global Consortium, for example, which I'm going to put in the body of the show. But is there anything else you want to kind of let folks know about?
Yeah. I think there's two things that I'd like to leave. One of the promises I made to the ranger in Big Bend National Park, and obviously you're in Texas. The park is one of the most fantastic places I've ever been, and I've been to a lot of national parks, and I kind of said that I would promote that to the park ranger. And I think that's real important. So I feel like I'm doing my duty, especially you out there could just talk about. But for anybody that's not been to Big Bend National Park, you got to do it. But you want to do it before April or the end of April. After that, the temperatures are crazy. Right. And I think the other thing that I just want to, I try to synthesize everything that I've been doing. What I'm trying to do in my little documentary, or why I'm on the border. I just want to put a human element to the people coming into the country. I think Sheriff Tony Estrada kind of taught me that even when you're enforcing the law, even if you have to arrest people because they're illegal, he's obviously in law enforcement, you got to do your job, but it doesn't mean you can't be humane to people. And I think people need to have some empathy for individuals coming across, just as I said, what kind of, a woman that knows that she's going to be raped, or a woman that's going to be sexually accosted, but is still willing to try to bring her children or look for a better way of life, and just ask people themselves, what would you do in that particular situation? Play the empathy game a little bit just to see if you were in their shoes, what your policy was. And everybody says we need a basic immigration, reform of immigration policy. Mm-hmm. I think that we can still do our work and be humane. So I think that's the last thing I'd like to leave. And I can send you the website for the Global Consortium, and if you could post that would be great.
Awesome, man. I appreciate it. And again, I appreciate your time. I know you're very busy, and so much info today, and I really appreciate you coming on. Folks, my guest today has been Dr. John Haas. He's the director and founder of the Global Consortium project, and again, you can find that link in the body of the episode today. This is The Bitter Truth with Abe Abdelhadi. You can also support us on patreon.com/The Bitter Truth. You can become a bitter pill. And we're going to start releasing some more tiers this spring. I'm excited about a couple of ideas, and we can just go from there. In the meantime, if this stuff makes you uncomfortable, it's supposed to, so sleep tight.